emerging technologies that we plan to use for defense. And so, there's aspects of that which are education and training, and aspects of that which are forecasting of the kind of workforces we're going to need. And then through that forecasting, we then need to understand how we can shape those workforces. And so that's combining the efforts of our schools, our post-secondary institutions, our companies, how they manage their workforce and forecast their workforce. And then, looking for those opportunities to train and retrain, upskill, so that we can meet, in my case, thinking about defense industry and national defense needs and emerging technologies. Thanks.
Thank you. It's always inspiring to hear how someone's whole career kind of leads up to those moments, and I'm excited to dig into more about the work you're doing over at NDIA. Chandler, can you tell us more about you and your work and why this issue is so important?
That's a hard act to follow, and I'm not gonna lie to you. Chandler Morse, Vice President for Public Policy here at Workday. Not unlike Arun, I think you could put my career through kind of a simulator, and it's about 1 in a million chance that I end up kind of where I am. I always am jealous of those folks that I had a buddy that woke up one day and said, I'm 5 years old, he wanted to be a vet, and he's a very happy vet right now later in life, but that was not. So I knew I wanted to work on policy. I wasn't really clear what that meant. So I actually have 2 environmental degrees. Landed in Washington as an environmental consultant, and found out pretty quickly that was not a career I wanted to pursue. But one of our clients was the National Association of Home Builders. So not unlike Arun, trade associations are sort of where I cut my teeth in Washington. At the time, I thought, well, I'll either be a lawyer or I'll go to Capitol Hill. And I was newly married, and my dear better half said, "Is there any way we could do your career advancement without sinking into mountains of debt?" So Capitol Hill was the way to go. So I joined Jeff Flake's team. I was supposed to be there for 2 years. I left 13 and a half years later. I didn't know the words for values-based employment, but I knew that I really liked the work that I was doing, and I liked to sleep well at night, and I liked to feel like what I was doing was important. When he retired, the Workday was expanding into DC. I was our first full-time DC hire. And everyone that knew me and that knew Workday also didn't know the words for values-based employment, but said, you're going to be very happy there in terms of having values be a driving force in how Workday conducts itself. So I joined Workday 5.5 years ago. I was our first DC hire. We've grown that program to frankly a very effective global advocacy team. I manage folks here in DC and Sacramento. I manage folks in Brussels, the UK, and Singapore. For us, we're a leading provider of cloud-based human capital management, financials, and analytics services. We were just named a Fortune 500 company, which is really great, and we also count more than half of the Fortune 500 among our customers. So we sit in this really unique place in this issue where not only are we a tech company involved in emerging technology, we're also a workforce, like we're a human capital management company. So the overlap of those two makes the issues we're talking about today front in mind for my team every day. When we think about AI, we think about a lot of applications from the workforce development side. The most important to me and to my team's work is around skills. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we've been talking about a skills-based approach to employment for a long time, and it's really through the application of AI. AI is ready-made to take a skills-based approach to scale, and it parses data, it comes up with inferences, it demystifies cloudy data, all of the things that are attributed to skills data. There's a ton of it. It's confusing. It's overlapping. And out of that, we can start to help people identify the skills that they have, help employers identify the skills gaps, and create connections between skills that they have and skills that they need, start to have data-driven career paths and career counseling. That's all really exciting to me. Part of my work with Jeff Flake was immigration, and so I've spent a long time looking at issues that affect entry-level workers, and so for me, anything that we can do to expand opportunity is top of mind.
It's exciting, definitely, to hear, especially where Workday sits at that intersection of it all. It's excited to hear more about it throughout this conversation. And Janelle, I'd love for you to tell us more about who you are and the work you do and why this issue of emerging technology and workforce development is so important.
Well, good evening. I apologize for my tardiness. I did have some technical difficulties, but I'm a
Understandable.
Florida A&M graduate. I am currently a CBCF fellow. I was in Congresswoman Clark's office, primarily managing a tech telecom portfolio, and now I'm with the Veteran Affairs Committee, Subcommittee Technology Modernization.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, Arun and Chandler, it sounds like you all are kind of very adept in understanding that balance of the hesitancy, but also the need to embrace new technology. How do you guys go about figuring out that balance and communicating that to the stakeholders? Chandler, let's start with you.
Um, I mean, I think the first thing that we have to realize is that that hesitancy is there. You know, Workday is we're all in on the potential for AI to unlock human potential, frankly. But we're also pretty realistic about the fact that there is this concern around unintended consequences. I think our first step, again, coming from a values-based position, was to build out our own internal responsible AI practices. So Workday, you know, we have leadership commitment. We've got a responsible AI board. Our chief, our general counsel runs that. Our chief compliance officer, our chief technology officer, our chief diversity officer all sit on that board. We also have dedicated resources. So we have a chief responsible AI officer. They report up through our chief integrity officer who has a direct independent line to our board of directors. We have responsible AI guidelines, review processes. We've got disclosure and transparency with our customers. And so from our own internal approach to AI, we recognized that there was going to be this sort of, wait, you know, is this safe? Can I use this? And our answer to that from our own internal approach is we've done the work to make sure that what we're doing is thoughtfully built and safe. I think where I come in, and the reason I'm in this conversation, frankly, is we also are one of the few tech companies that believe that this issue set demands some level of regulation. That regulation needs to be smart, it needs to be proportional, it needs to be thoughtful. Frankly, it needs to balance building trust with supporting innovation. But it does, we do believe that it needs to be regulated. So there's all of the steps that we can take from a corporate perspective can help move the trust conversation down the line. And frankly, we've been partnering with organizations like the Future Privacy Forum to kind of take not only what we're doing, but also expand that into some best practices. Our sense is that there's kind of an emerging set of practices that everyone is using, particularly in the HR space. We don't know anyone that is leveraging AI in the hiring context, for example, and is like, don't tell anyone, don't tell the candidate, don't tell it, like, keep it up. There's kind of an industry norm at this point of transparency and disclosure. Make sure people know, make sure what data that's being based on, make sure they know how the decision's being made, make sure how that AI is being leveraged. And so what we wanted to do was wrap our arms around some of those best practices and put them out as almost a cookbook for HR folks that were looking to think about that. We joined with Indeed, ADP, LinkedIn, Workday to try to amplify that. But we also are pretty cognizant that there's a level of trust that really is only gained when there's a regulatory envelope in which those concerns sit. And so in addition to our own practices, we are very heavily engaged in advocating for a regulatory environment that for which people can come into contact with these technologies and feel like they're being used as intended, feel like they've got a recourse if they aren't. And that I know we'll touch on that a little bit later, so I'll sort of park that there. But I think my biggest answer to that question is we have to recognize that hesitancy is there, and our concern is, you know, if COVID taught us anything, it's that the economy can turn upside down overnight. And frankly, agility and the ability to pivot and the ability for employers and workers to succeed in a rapidly changing environment has to be of paramount importance. We think AI is going to play a big role in that in terms of providing those tools, but we don't know that everyone's going to want to take them all, really adopt those tools if they don't trust them. So building that trust is very important to my team.
Most definitely. And I love how you talked about the powerfulness of data in that space as well. The more data you can provide, the more people might be able to trust something. And Arun, I'd love for you to chime in there. So how
Yeah,
have you thought about
so
that
just
balance?
just to spin off of what Chandler was talking about into the defense context, um, everybody wants the Defense Department, the military, to have access to the newest, most emerging technologies and capabilities to do the things we all want them to do, to include AI. And every company, whether they're a big traditional defense contractor or a cool new Silicon Valley robotics or software AI company, wants to go as fast as they possibly can. The challenge is, you don't want to ever send somebody out into the battlefield or, into an operation with an unproven technology. And so we've got systems in place which allow you to work out the technical issues for technologies through testing. Chandler worked for the state of Arizona, lots of large installations there that spend all of their time testing new systems. So, we do things like the rigorous test and evaluation of our systems. We check for their cybersecurity. We check to see whether the service members are trained to use and understand how to use the system. And all those things are really important to do when you're thinking about trying to make use of new technologies. And with some of them, like AI, for example, there's also going to be these set of treaty obligations and regulations. And so there's only so much you want your AI to be able to do on the battlefield, for example, while still being really helpful to service members and keep them alive on the battlefield. And so you have to sort of figure out how to make people comfortable that, the stuff is going to work and it's going to be compliant with all of our norms. And that's going to be true in AI for sure. It's going to be true in bio for sure. It's going to be true in lots of different areas where emerging technologies are going to have an impact. So in all these things, we have these processes to build regulations or to test equipment, and they're never fast enough for anyone. And so we need to figure out, so what can we do better with even that workforce who develops those regulations to make them go faster, understand the technologies better, and then maybe even let them use advanced technologies to do their part of this work faster. So if I had more efficient, modern testing systems, could I test new technologies more quickly and get them out? So those are some of the kinds of things we think about when we're trying to balance risk and use of emerging technologies.
And I love how you highlighted why it's so important in that defense space. And that's something that you and Janelle kind of have in common with the work you all do in defense. I know, Janelle, you work with the Veteran Affairs Committee. Can you tell us more about how this technology, defense, workforce development intersection kind of impacts the work you do?
Ron said it beautifully. I think there will be great impacts in operational efficiency, as well as decision making. So that's going to require a diverse group of individuals, industry leaders, to be included within that conversation to see what is going to be adaptable for different defense strategies. I'm thinking of different lenses is going to take. So it's going to be automated systems, different academic scholars to bring their expertise, as well as considering cybersecurity, and of course, that continuous capability that these technologies are going to have, as they will continuously be, ever evolving. So yeah, for sure.
Most definitely. Chandler, I know you touched a little bit about the policy perspective there. Can you dig a little bit deeper about why policy and regulation are going to be so important here with emerging technology?
Even if I didn't want to talk about why I thought it was important, the fact that pretty much every policymaker we know around the world is talking about it at the moment is already kind of making it. And Janelle, including your former boss at an office we worked with on these issues closely. So I mean, I think a bunch of things. So I think one, we're seeing the same trend we saw in privacy, which is the EU has moved forward. They passed their EU AI Act. It'll go into effect in a couple of years. I think that has sort of really supercharged the conversation. Clearly, Congress is interested. I'm going to say this. I'm not going to. Nobody needs to associate themselves with my comments, but I'm not sure Congress is swiftly anytime soon going to adopt anything related to AI. We knock on wood. There's some green shoots out there, but now in the U.S. the states are moving forward, hurtling forward. 600 bills introduced this year, 440% increase in attention in state legislatures over last year, and in many ways it's the same story we saw with privacy. The EU moved with GDPR. Congress is still trying to figure out what it wants to do with a comprehensive bill, and more than half of states have either adopted or introduced a comprehensive bill. So there's fascinating trends going on in the tech space, and frankly, Workday's here for all of it, whether it's Canada, Singapore, Australia, the EU, or multiple states across the country. We think advancing this conversation around smart AI safeguards is really crucial for all the reasons we talked about before. There's a few emerging themes around which, a lot of these frameworks are kind of aligning. So one is, I think there's a widespread belief that there needs to be a risk-based component. The same algorithm that decides that I like Downton Abbey because I watched Peaky Blinders. I do like both of those, to be honest. I'm a sucker for a period piece, but if that was wrong, I don't know that needs the same level of scrutiny of an algorithm that's reviewing my chest X-ray. Both of which are really important depending on sort of where you stand. But so, what's the scope of the regulation? What's in the bucket in terms of, for us, HR is kind of always top of mind when it comes to those issues for which there might be high risk uses, also healthcare, financial services, criminal justice, but then also a combination of what the scope, but then also how much AI is involved. Is the AI actually making the decision and sending out rejection notices? That's super, super high risk. You really want to focus on that. Versus, is it helping to set up interviews and optimizing time schedules? That might not be the same risk profile. And so really getting that risk-based approach is important. And it's important for a bunch of reasons. One, we really want workable regulations, and we want people to feel safe, and regulatory regimes that collapse under their own weight don't make people feel safe. And so if you do seek to regulate everything under the sun, there's a really good chance there's not going to be the resources to really target those specific areas. We think there's a bunch of different players in the AI supply chain. There are AI developers, there are AI deployers, there are AI sort of end users, and not unlike privacy, there are different roles and responsibilities associated with those actors, and we want to make sure those roles and responsibilities are explicit and really clear. In terms of accountability, there's a knee-jerk reaction to reach for mandatory third-party auditing. We think that's immature at the moment. The standards kind of aren't there just yet. And so we've used impact assessments as a tool to assess what's going on in terms of risk with privacy and others. We think that makes a ton of sense in the AI space. Part of our message to lawmakers around the world is we're not starting from scratch. We've regulated tech in the past. We'll regulate tech in the future. There's some tools that we've used. Let's look at what sort of works. And then the last piece is interoperability. Europe has moved. The states are moving. Colorado has passed their bill. There are other states that are likely to, I think, knock on wood, pass some additional, and they don't all have to be the same, but they need to all kind of work together. And I think in many ways privacy is not a bad example of that, in that what we didn't see was 22, 23, 25 different state approaches to a privacy regulatory approach. We saw kind of two, like the kind of Virginia, Connecticut model and the California model. And in this case, we're kind of hoping that what we see is the Colorado model at the state level. And it's funny because we have a bunch of, you're all, trained government relations professionals. And I know we've all said, oh no, here comes a 50-state patchwork. I know we've all written those talking points. And the truth is, I'm not sure that those mean the same thing anymore when it comes to tech policy at the state level. That's kind of not what's playing out. So it's kind of a brand new world. We think technology plays a really critical role here. We think there is starting to be some alignment around key kind of planks in building that path to trust. And like I said, we're here for all of it.
Most definitely. And I mean, that new world is going to need a new rule book in some ways. So it's exciting to see that everyone's on that that forefront of developing that.
Hey,
Janelle,
so
oh, yes.
sorry, Victoria. So
Mhm.
just jumping on what Chandler
Yeah.
said there, we've done some work in Emerging Technologies Institute looking at policies governing emerging technologies over the course of history. And basically the conclusion you come to is that there's kind of four groups of people who need to be involved. One is there has to be someone developing these regulations that actually understands technology, knows how it works, that kind of thing. There's got to be the user community. That could be a military community, that could be a business community. It does, but the stuff you produce actually has to be useful to someone. And the regulations can't keep that from happening. The other thing is you need the traditional policy ethics community, the people who usually do this kind of thing and develop these regulatory framework. And then you need an understanding of global markets and economics and finance, because you can regulate yourself into a position where you can't compete anymore globally. And then you don't have an industry to regulate anymore eventually. And so unless you line up those four different voices into that room and build that regulation set with all of those voices, you're going to steer off widely too far in a direction that, I mean, you could end up with something that the military finds completely useful, but isn't consistent with other principles that we have, right? And you don't want that. On the other hand, you don't want to deliver to them something that's completely consistent with this set of ethical principles and then isn't actually helpful. And so how you do that is really, really tough. And I think Chandler nicely touched all the different elements of it. And I think the other thing, which is true for especially when you're thinking about training a workforce for these areas, is the fact that we have a federated system. So there are going to be federal rules for both the use of the technology and training people to use those technologies. But if we don't align that with the state and local rules, then we're not really working the way this country actually develops those things.
Definitely. I mean, I think that piece about having the different types of voices in the room to figure out how to make this policy apply to everyone. And I think that's going to be a really key player there as we develop this policy and move forward.
If I let me just, if I
Yeah.
could just really quickly, we had a kind of a fascinating experience in Europe, which is, Europe set off to regulate AI, and in many ways they had a playbook from GDPR. And I think at the time with GDPR, they said, we're going to regulate privacy, and everyone sort of chuckled and said, yeah, have at it, good luck. But when they set, and then they achieved it, and when they set out to regulate AI, we went in and said, look, we're not opposed to regulation. We think it makes sense, but there's ways that you can do it that are going to be really important. And this is to Arun's point of like getting the right people in the room. We were pushing on an open door in Europe. They knew that there were things that they didn't know. They knew that there were, quickly evolving technologies that they weren't aware of. And so what they wanted was industry coming in, and I'm speaking from the industry perspective of those stakeholders that Arun mentioned, because that's sort of my job. But us going in saying like, look, we want to work with you. There's ways that you could do this that we just absolutely could not stay in the market, and there's ways that you could do this that we absolutely could stay in the market, and you could actually help us build trust. And they were really open to that. So I think it's a fascinating, each one of these in some ways, every policy issue gets treated as if it is disconnected from anything else, but it's fascinating to see those linkages to previous processes where you're like, oh no, this is building on each other. And I think that's a really strong one.
And in some ways, I think a big conversation that's going to have to happen is prioritization, like which player gets to have a stronger say, or is their voice weighted more in the conversation? So thank you both for that insight there. I think it also ties into some of the work Janelle has done. Her research kind of focuses on how this new technology is going to impact communities of color. So I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more about that research and how it ties into just this ongoing topic about workforce development, emerging technology.
Yeah, so Chandler actually hit on this just a little bit. So my research is on the socioeconomic approach of digital redlining and AI impacts. And if you know the historical context of redlining, It is the disparities of denying financial services to African Americans. And we are seeing some kind of building blocks within the digital sphere of digital redlining, which is the practices of denying certain resources and services to African Americans or just minorities in general. So this can kind of reinforce a cycle as these inputs are being used to create different, large size models. And as we continue to create conversation around this, I think it's important that we be proactive in measures as well as creating transparency for these AI systems. Just like you said, Chandler, it might not be a problem, to if submitting an application just to go through and create a calendar usage, all that good things. But of course, we need some monetary insight when it comes to making sure that we're not reinforcing those biases, choosing a candidate or, things of that nature.
Definitely, and the ramifications can go from choosing a candidate to even more serious topics.
Right.
So it's so important. Everyone, I know when we spoke earlier, you talked a little bit about the importance of broadening the pipeline for STEM talent. Can you tell us more about that and how that kind of ties into this issue?
Yeah, by all accounts, if you look at the forecast, these emerging technologies are going to require different kinds of workforces than the ones we have today, whether you're thinking about them for commercial or a military potential use. And so we've tried to do a lot of work in thinking about those pipelines and expanding them to create more talent to go into all of those different roles that we've been talking about here. So one thing for sure is, we need to make sure our universities, from the large research universities through all of the smaller ones at the state and local level and the HBCU and MSI schools, and then the community colleges, are they getting the support they need to be able to teach? Are they getting the equipment they need to be able to train people to do jobs? Now, and in any field, we don't just need PhDs. In fact, we probably need very few of them. Speaking as a PhD, we probably need more actual useful people who can use the stuff. We need people graduating from community colleges who understand 3D printing, who know how to code with AI, right? And not everyone needs be a PhD to do those things. What's holding up, it turns out, some of our most advanced weapon systems today isn't a lack of PhDs, it's a lack of skilled craftsmen who know how to use advanced technologies. And so, we've tried to do more and more work bringing in talent into the defense industrial base, both to the companies and the government. One of our challenges is most of the work you need to do, not most, but a lot of the work you need to do, you need to have a security clearance, in which case you need to be a US citizen. And so what we've targeted is there's a set of schools, namely the HBCU, MI, and MSI schools, who produce more trained US citizen STEM graduates than anyone else. And so if you're looking for US talent, then reaching out to those kinds of schools is probably the place to go. And so we've tried to make more connections between companies and those schools and the government in those schools to give them those kinds of resources they need to be the pipelines for that kind of talent.
Yeah, if I could just add to Aaron's point, because that's great. I said it doesn't take experts for this field to look robust. I think there's three things that should be considered. It's access to services, becoming culturally knowledgeable, and allowing students to, of course, to be of all things knowledgeable. I love to use that saying, and be optimistic in the tool sets that you give them as these emerging technologies continue to show themselves.
Most definitely. And I think there's also a tie in there for the work you do, Chandler, at Workday. I mean, figuring out how to expand the talent pool and maybe figuring out that it might look different today than it did 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah, that's what immediately leaps to mind for us is that, we hear there's tremendous resources both from the federal level on workforce development. There's also most employers have some sort of training approach, or they're interested. I mean, they sort of know in this hiring environment that they've got to be upskilling or offering opportunities. The challenge often, though, is how quickly everything is moving. And so the real question is like, well, if I've got, let's say I have resources to go get reskilled and I want to go find something new to do, most of the time those decisions are economically driven. It's rarely a I'm going to go, write the great American novel, or, relax on a back porch professionally. Like it's how do I go increase my economic potential? The question then always becomes, well, what do I go get trained in? And that answer is a lot harder than people think it is, because of how quickly these emerging technologies are moving into the marketplace. And so we have spent a considerable time thinking about how do you answer the question of what's an in-demand role, and because that's ultimately what needs to drive workforce development, whether it's federal, whether it's industry, whether it's academia. Like, they're all sort of pointed at kind of filling the roles that we need. And so part of our work has been looking at federal labor market data and whether it's fit for service in today's world. I use this example all the time. The COVID pandemic response lasted 2 or 3 years, depending on when you start and stop it. Well, most federal data, labor market data, is on a 6-month to an annual basis. So in the entire COVID pandemic response, we might have gotten, half a dozen jobs reports. Like, that's just not responsive enough to start to drive kind of where things are going in the economy. So we've prepared some model legislation. We're working with folks on Capitol Hill to start to look at BLS and census and all of these data sources, and how we can up level them to real time, economy wide, focused on skills and emerging roles, as a way of driving some of these conversations to a successful outcome.
Definitely. Again, data plays such a big role in all of this. So one thing that stood out to me from all of your backgrounds is that you all spent some time on the Hill, working in Congress, developing policy from that perspective. And so I'm curious, how has that experience impacted just how you view emerging technology in general? Arun, how has it impacted you, your time on the Hill and in that sort of space?
I'll say one thing and I'll let these guys go, and then we'll catch up on what we didn't get to. But the one I'll say is, look, I showed up on Capitol Hill with a PhD in something. It was nanotechnology. Turns out no one ever asked me a question. Well, not no one, but almost no one ever asked me a question about nanotechnology. But the point is, I was there as a science fellow to help senators understand science and technology. And there's lots of fellows on the Hill now doing that science, doing that for IT. There's just not enough people on Capitol Hill who have technical backgrounds. And I'm learning not enough who have industry backgrounds either, so that the people who are advising senators and House members on laws, which then create regulations, or on funding, which then drives research and technology development, aren't attuned to technology, don't know how to absorb it. Sometimes they're afraid of it, and that generally leads to bad law, bad regulation, bad funding. And so one thing I learned is that I should do anything I can to push more technical people to jobs in Capitol Hill. You don't have to spend 20 years like I did, but you should try it for a little while. There's a lot of people there who need a lot of help doing really important stuff in technology development.
Most
Yeah,
definitely.
and really quick, I
Mhm.
believe data is what drives policy and legislation. So like Iran said, a lot of people that are experts within this field, I believe they are essential for the conversation in creating guardrails of what legislation looks like, but also ensuring that, you have your community leaders engaged in the conversation to, see what their perspective is, see who's actually doing grassroots activities in their community so that they can go and partner up with these technical experts so that they're ensuring that they're getting the correct resources that they need.
Definitely. And Janelle, I know you're working on the Hill currently, so I'd love to kind of hear your perspective of that. So what does it look like right now when you're discussing these types of topics? How do you go about that? And
Reports.
yeah.
Yeah. We're looking at numbers. Definitely looking at numbers and seeing what it is that we can do from there. Like I said, that is what drives legislation, if you're doing it correctly.
Most definitely. Chandler, what's your perspective on it all?
I mean, just plus one to everything that's been said already. I think the only thing that I would add is, from my experience, the bigger the bill, the less likely it's going to get done. And so we spend a lot of time on scoping. Like, how can we, what's the, um, I was in the basement of the Longworth cafeteria with with a colleague from Accenture and a colleague from NVIDIA. And at the time we thought, what is the easiest thing we could get these members to focus on in terms of AI? And NIST had just finished the privacy risk management framework, and we thought, what about an AI risk management framework? And it was very small. It was not a massive bill. It wasn't, tens of millions of dollars of funding. It was a rifle shot, and nobody could argue with it. And everyone we talked to, we just built this coalition, and now there's a risk management framework. And so we're sort of encouraging folks, let's all agree on was kind of what was behind us pushing some of the risk of the best practices for HR was, look, this is what's happening in the landscape already. You don't have to create anything. Like, it's okay if policy lags behind industry practice and just sort of looks at kind of what's going on in a positive or negative way. But so often in my experience, and I spent a long time on immigration, including the last comprehensive immigration bill that passed the Senate and then didn't get, like, comprehensive bills they are very, very tough. And so scoping is my only advice.
Scoping. Got
Yeah,
it.
let me just jump in.
Yeah.
Janelle pointed out the importance of connecting like technical people and industry people with community leaders, right? Because that's the other thing you learn on the Hill, that place really matters. If you go to the executive branch, place matters less for some reason. But on the Hill, everybody knows where they're from, where their boss is from, and they're really proud of that. And it's really important to do things for where you are from. And so a lot of technology policy people are sort of blind to that, and they don't understand the local impacts. And it's getting the resources to the communities like Janelle's talking about. But I think there's also this, every community is different and has a different appetite for absorbing new technologies or new ways of doing anything. And unless you can attune it to them, they're going to oppose you. And then the big things start falling apart, like Chandler's talking about, because you didn't sort of think through your one size fits all approach to this system built up of like lots of different localities, right? And then maybe in emerging technologies, one of the most important pieces is, as much as we love the new technology, it's probably going to displace something else. And there's lots of people with good jobs in that something else. And unless you think about those people and the impacts on them, that's a natural group of people who have to oppose you because they need to protect their constituents, and those constituents need to have jobs and all of those things. And so too often this sort of textbook economic, like, well, this is economic efficiency, of course we have to do this. It doesn't take into account those sort of state, local, district realities.
Definitely. At the end of the day, policy impacts people. And I think sometimes DC can be so separated from that. So again, it's like so important to bring that perspective in. I do want to remind our audience that if you have any questions that you'd like to put into the chat, please feel free. We have time still to get to those questions and have our panelists answer them. But for right now, I think what would be an important conversation to have is, how do all of these stakeholders come to the table and have a productive conversation, find that solution? So particularly, how do the public and private sectors work together to improve this issue? Chandler, do you have a perspective on it all?
I get asked this question a lot, and most of my response is on the private sector, which is, you know, I don't know how many people are really paying attention to how quickly the AI policy landscape is evolving. It's a little bit new in that we haven't exactly seen the level of policy conversation at the same time of technology adoption. And so typically it's sort of social media was much farther after, privacy was a little bit farther after, and here it's happening at the same time. And so our call to action to everyone in the private sector is, your industry has a trade association. I guarantee it. And your trade association is thinking about AI. I guarantee it. And so let your voice be known. Like, what do you think these technologies can do for you? There is a I want to be careful about this because I don't want to put there is a bit of a hype cycle in terms of like what what the good and what the bad will be, and there are sort of there are places where the rubber's meeting the road, and they're thinking, how can I apply this technology safely and responsibly to fix this problem or to achieve this end. And that's kind of where we got to get to. Like that's almost a missing part of these conversations is, how are you actually going to use the technology and how are you going to implement it in a safe and thoughtful way? And there are a lot of those stories, and we need all of them. We need all of them in the policy context, because a year or two from now, we're not going to be talking about AI policy development. We're going to be talking about AI policy compliance. And my fear is that conversation will miss some of those really good ideas and really, strong practices. And then we're down the road in a compliance environment that doesn't allow for some uses that turns out are going to be really, really important. So I think what I beg people to do is get involved. If you're not involved, you are in an industry setting, I guarantee you there's a way for you to be involved.
Most definitely. There's always a route to advocacy and having your voice be heard. So we have a few questions in the chat, so let's kind of dive into those. Looks like Fortune is asking, what are some of the potential benefits of blockchain technology? And I'll invite anyone to kind of chime in there with their answer. Maybe from the defense perspective,
No, I was going to defer to Arun.
Oh,
Yeah, so what the Defense Department has begun to use blockchain for is to increase the security of information that's being passed. Not so much like on the battlefield or anything like that, but within the supply chain. So if you want to make sure that the parts you're getting from your sub-tier supplier, because you're the person building the helicopter and you want to make sure all the parts are exactly the ones you asked for, and you want to know that they came from the places that you want them to come for, people are starting to use blockchain for those kinds of things. And so and then you're starting to see it with some of the payments in those systems as well. And so for the security of the communications, blockchain is starting to be used, and there's some companies offering some really good services of blockchain for those kinds of transactions.
Got it. It's always kind of interesting how technology can impact every aspect and every kind of point along the process in developing things. So Julie has a question about, do you ever experience deja vus in your work? How do you preventively work to not experience the negative deja vus of policy development? So maybe, do you ever kind of look back and see that history is repeating itself here, maybe with a previous technology that people were worried about figuring out what the solution might be?
So I wouldn't call that negative deja vus. I'd call that earned wisdom, right? So like, yeah, every new technology, we've sort of talked about this stuff. I was involved in National Nanotechnology Initiative, National Quantum Initiative, National AI Initiative. And it's similar kind of conversations. It doesn't actually, I'm going to say personally, I don't think it's depressing in any sense. These are the things you have to work through, all of the kinds of things that Chandler and Janelle have been talking about are the kinds of things you have to work through to get the regulatory framework right, to get the funding framework right. What you probably should do as you're sort of like pretend next we were working on time machines, right? So it's time for the National Time Machine Initiative and the regulatory framework. Whoever is going to work on that, they should at least look at all the things we got right and wrong when we did the nano initiative, and when we did the quantum initiative and the neural network and all the other ones, right? And so I guess to avoid some of the negative feelings of deja vu, people should reach back and try to learn the lessons of the past and just don't make all the same mistakes we did.
Just don't make mistakes. So easy, right? And about Chandler or Janelle, do you have any input there about the deja vu of policy development?
No, yeah, I think it's important that we continue to reflect on trends that we see, just as Aran said, so we can study those trends and see what it is that we need to implement moving forward for these technologies. So
I'm a big I don't think like none of these are the same. I mean, like if you squint and like, but I'm a big proponent of looking at the differences and how we can capitalize on them. And I'll say that with full disclosure. I often say like, well, privacy. We've seen this movie before, so you can tell me that I'm contradicting myself, but there are differences. And so like one difference, for example, is AI policy is moving a lot faster than privacy policy. It took years from the first introduction of a privacy bill in the state to passage, and we saw Colorado move in the same year. And we've seen the other difference is it took a long time for one of the privacy bills at the state level to be adopted, and then a model emerge. In this case, states were meeting in a multi-state environment before even introduction. So in some ways, same as it ever was. It's DC. It's always going to have a bill number. It's always going to have but in other ways, these processes all have uniquenesses that you have to kind of like grasp, I think, and then leverage. So, for example, in the AI context, we didn't wait to go start to talk to California about what AI legislation was going to look like there, because we knew that from privacy that was going to happen, and it happened faster. So I think it's important to, if you feel like you're in a deja vu, to really look hard for the differences, because there might be opportunities in them.
Definitely. So Courtney has a question about the role of local government. I know we've talked a bit about state, talked a lot about federal government, but how can local government best support the development of AI policy with regard to the digital divide?
I think it's important for external partnerships. So whether that might be your various stakeholders or educational institutes to develop a criteria that is going to prepare students to enter the workforce. So on a local level, what is DC Gov looking for their potential candidates, and how can they, partner up with them so that they can just make sure that they have those technical skill sets for the modern day job. So.
Definitely, they're the closest to the people, so it's like
Right.
the most hands-on experience with developing that workforce and developing that next generation.
Yeah,
Zach,
on the local and county state level, especially for AI, there is going to be this infrastructure requirement too, right? The people themselves are going to need particular equipment to work computers and such. You're going to need access to data. I mean, someone's got to build data centers. Someone's got to power data centers. I live in a part of the world where all we have around here in Virginia is data centers. And so that's really affected the local community. And so there's an infrastructure piece, whether I'm talking about bio or AI or anything, that if a local community wants to get involved, they've got to figure out how to invest in it appropriately. And then to Janelle's point, on the workforce side, in this country, education is really a local issue. It's not so much a federal issue. I mean, there's issues at the federal level, but it's controlled locally. And so if we're really going to have that AI enabled, bio enabled, whatever it is, workforce for the future, we have to include the local school districts and the local community colleges and make sure they're aligned with where the whole nation wants to go.
Most definitely. Most definitely. It's a threefold process. Every level of government and every stakeholder is going to have to play a role in developing these next steps. Zachary's question is, what metrics or KPIs should be tracked to assess the effectiveness of upskilling programs? So again, back to that data. Chandler, do you have any thoughts there? Maybe of what kinds of measures of success, what that looks like?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of outcomes. I mean,
Yeah.
did it lead to additional employment? Did it lead to high level employment? Did it lead to additional economic opportunity? I think you know, I think a lot about scarce resources, scarce time, people putting time and energy into upskilling, and I think a very real question is for what? And so I think ultimately, end of the day, it's not the number of hours you spend in class, it's not the number of of credentials you earned, or it's ultimately, did it open up new opportunities?
Mm. Very much so. Yeah. At the very end of the day, it's, did we reach that goal of empowering the people to reach those opportunities? And then our last audience question is, what types of efforts do you see Congress looking at to support on-the-job training or upskilling employees at smaller firms under 100 employees? So many owners are afraid to train their workforce since they're afraid employees will leave once they get the new skills. I could see that being kind of a bit of a fear in the private sector. Is there any insight there about how to support on-the-job training while balancing that risk?
There have been some efforts around incentivizing employers, whether it's through the tax code or whether it's through additional grants. I mean, I think at the end of the day, employers want an upskilled workforce. They want employees to be able to do more. I think that the worry of attrition is makes sense. And so really trying to incentivize those who aren't currently engaged in upskilling into upskilling, I think there is a federal role for that.
So I always like to kind of end our conversation looking forward into the future. So I'd love for us to just go around for each panelist to tell us about what you think the future of technology looks like and how is it going to continue to affect this issue of workforce development. Let's start with Janelle.
Yeah, I believe the future is bright for technology. Of course, there are going to be some effects, but I believe it to be, in regards to the workforce, efficient and effective. It is going to make our jobs a lot easier. Yeah, but I hope that there is going to be improved capabilities just for us. But like I said, there needs to be a continuous human oversight as these technologies continue to emerge themselves.
Most definitely. Arun, what do you think about the future of it all?
So I think technologies, a broader set of technologies in all of the different disciplines, physical sciences, computer sciences, biotech, are going to be increasing in their capability at this incredibly accelerating pace. And we're just all going to have to learn to deal with it. And that means there's going to be, these huge amount of opportunities for people to get interesting careers and jobs, for new communities to certainly explode because they're in the right place at the right time and take advantage of a new technology and see these companies growing, and then those companies are where they are. And then there'll be these huge disruptions, because we're going to move out of the era of, you know, building giant TVs to building flat TVs to building nobody has a TV anymore, right? They have phones, right? And that means some people got a job and some people lost a job. And so I just think that's going to be happening more and more at a faster and faster pace. But I do think that we're going to be in a position where we can adapt to those things much more quickly just because of the technologies also. They'll let us shift our resources more quickly. They'll let us retrain people more quickly if we can take advantage of them.
Adaptability. I feel like that's something we've said a bit throughout this whole conversation, is the importance of being able to pivot and change and adapt to this new environment. Chandler, what about you? How do you feel about the future of this emerging technology space?
I want to plus one to Janelle's human oversight and human in the loop. Part of that, part of that hype cycle, frankly, is that there's this like market for these like super automated, completely influential technologies for which there's not even a human near them, and I just don't know that I see anyone really leaping to embrace that technology, and so that human in the loop component is essential. I also, I'm not a glass half full person normally, so I just want to like be really clear. But there is a moment happening in skills right now where industry, policy, the federal government, everyone is sort of aligning on the need for increased agility, the need for expanding the worker pool, the need for getting incumbent workers into different roles as things change quickly. And technology is supporting that moment in a way that we haven't had it supported in the past. Skills are not new. That's something we've talked about, but there is this synergy of a bunch of issues coming together. And I'm incredibly bullish on that frankly, in the short term of adoption and operationalizing a skills-based approach to talent and all of the benefits that come with that, which are considerable.
I think it's all happening faster than we even recognize at times, you know? Well, thank you all for just sharing your insight, your experience, and your perspectives here today with me and with our audience. Thank you to our audience for participating with questions. And you all can find a recording of this on our website, as well as takeaways. So keep an eye out for those, as well as for our next Leadership Connect webinars that will be coming out in the next few weeks. Thank you to everyone.
Thank
Great
you
job.
all. Thank you for creating the
Thank
space. This was great.
Agreed. Victoria, nice work. Thank you.